terms of this added pattern tool. I don't know if you've been given introduction in terms of this rectangle tool, all of these tools yet, have you? Like all of these rectangle tools here.
We're familiar with some of them, like the internal polygon and the polygon tool, but we haven't really
Okay.
learned them completely yet. So
okay.
I think a brief summary would be good.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'll start with this polygon tool, and under this polygon tool, there are 3 options. The simplest one are rectangle and ellipse, and then we move on to this polygon tool. So let's talk about firstly the rectangle tool. If you click this rectangle tool, and you can, of course, drag or move a rectangle freely to create a piece of a fabric, or you can hold your shift to constrain the proportion of this rectangle and to create a square shape fabric. And yeah, so the next thing is that you use this rectangle tool, and then without dragging or moving or pressing your left button, you can just click your left button, and then you will have this interface and tells you what kind of size you want to create for a rectangle shape. For instance, if you want to create 500 millimeter size, and whether you want to link the width and height. And also there is another really cool function called replicate, because this helps you to create many kind of fabric and this replication too. And you can choose their alignment angle, for instance, 90° or 45°, or interval, like the distance between each rectangle circle shape. And thus now you have a list of shape here by using this rectangle tool. And yeah, so you can, so let me, and then I go back to this transform tool and select them all, delete. And then the next tool is quite similar to rectangle tool, is this ellipse tool, helps you to create ellipse shape, such as you can drag, move your shape freely, or hold your shifts to constrain the proportion. You can create a really round circle here. Or same as rectangle, you left click, and then you can choose the size of this shape, such as and body, and then you can choose this interval, number of the angle. Let me say, for instance, I choose 180, and then I have, yeah. And that might be very helpful for you to create things like button or buttonholes, and this kind of you can place a hose or highlight, and by using these tools, this ellipse tool. Okay, and then so everything you're working in Close 3D, you created by using these 3 tools: polygon tool, rectangle tool, ellipse tool, has to be a closed shape. You can actually draw lines by using internal line tool, but everything you created by using the external, those shape tools, has to be a closed shape. So that's something you want to keep in mind, because some students want to import, for instance, an Illustrator file into Close 3D, and then that pattern is not closed pattern, so that he or she wouldn't be able to input that into Close 3D. So that's the thing you want to keep in mind. I will teach you later how you can create shape in Illustrator and input that. But just to bear this in mind, everything you created, a piece of fabric, has to be a closed shape. And next, we move on to this polygon tool. So let me delete everything here. Polygon tool is a little bit complicated compared with this rectangle and ellipse tool. For polygon tool, if you're familiar with Illustrator software, you will find a lot in common. For instance, you can let's create a simple front A line dress here. And then you click the middle point, and then to press the left button, and you can have this curved shape, and then you can go back to the previous point and to really close, remove one of the handle, and then continue, and then draw a curved shape here or close this point. And while you are creating this shape, you can also hold your Command key on your keyboard to create continuous curved shape. Because for previous function, like when I'm pressing this button and dragging, I'm literally like create a point for this curve, right? But if you hold your Command key or Apple key or Control key, I mean, depends on your computer setup. For mine, it's Command key. If you hold your Command key and to draw, oops, sorry. I think has a different setup for. Yeah, so hold your Command key and you will draw this curve continuously and without having a new kind of point here. And this really helps you to draw a kind of shape, but you doesn't have any point for this kind of curve. Let me go back to the last stage, and then holding my Command key at the same time when I'm drawing. You see this right point, you won't be able to see it later, right? And another really good function is while you are driving, while you are driving, while you are creating, while you are drawing, and before you close this shape, you can actually right click and to enter the specific distance or length of your next movement. For instance, you can choose this next movement 220 centimeter, and you can choose this option called mirror. And this axis of this mirror can be y-axis, so that you're creating the shape at both sides, and you click OK, and to continuous draw this shape and then close it. And after you create shape like this, and you go to this edit pattern tool, you might notice this pattern has been marked into yellow and blue color. It means it helps you to really sort of, if you edit any point on one hand, you will simultaneously edit another point at the same time. So that's a really functional one, like use this polygon tool and then right click while you're moving your mouse, and so that you have this mirror effect pattern. Okay, so that's in terms of polygon tool, and you can really try to draw whatever shape you like. And the next tool I want to mention is this internal tool. So as you might be introduced, you have this internal rectangle, internal ellipse. You also have this dot option and internal line or polygon. So as I mentioned, everything you created by using this polygon, rectangle, ellipse tool has to be a closed shape. But that doesn't affect the internal line or polygon tool, meaning that if you use internal polygon or line tool, you can create segment line and not a closed line at all. And so let's firstly, same as before, we talk about this internal rectangle, ellipse, dot firstly, because they are the simplest one. And then we talk about this internal polygon, internal line too. And for this internal rectangle shape, you can like hover your mouse within this pattern. Remember, everything you created by internal line, internal tool, has to be within the pattern. So because this is a symmetric pattern, so if I created something on the one hand, and it will show on the other hand as well. And in the 3D space, you can decide to show these internal lines or not. So all the internal lines will be marked into this red color. And you can also decide to show others such as baseline, or other line options as well. So I decided to show this internal line because it can help me to see it more closely, the shape I created in 2D pattern. And yeah, so you can hold your shift to constrain the proportion of this. And you can also like left click and choose the size you want to create for your rectangle shape. And maybe it's 8 or 8. And then you can choose replicate how many rectangle shape you want to create and the distance, interval distance between them, and click OK. And then you have these internal lines here, internal shapes here. And same as this internal ellipse is a really simple one. Create ellipse freely or hold your shift to constrain the proportion, or just simply left click to change the size or replicate number. And then this is the start function. And to remove, and here in Close 3D is also very functional one. Like after you create some internal shape, you can go back this transform pattern tool, click any of the pattern, and then to move it. So that's really saves you lots of time compared with physical making, right? So if you create something internally and you saw it already, and it's very difficult to saw it again, but in Close 3D, you can just simply move or drag this shape. And also, of course, you can click one of the shape and then hit the delete key to remove any of the internal shape. And under this transform pattern too, you can also select one or different shapes by holding your shift and then right click. There is a function called convert to whole, right? So people ask me like, what do you use for this internal shape? It can really help you to create such as pocket or things like a hole. So you can convert the internal shape as a whole. And what's more, you can also continue to clone, like right click, you clone this internal shape as a pattern outside. And then afterwards, like you see, because you're creating a pattern here, you can start to resew them together. So you see what I mean? So you firstly right click and convert it to whole, and you can also clone it as a pattern, an outside pattern. And then you can choose this like free sewing tool and select one of the shape and then select another shape to really sort of sew them together. But I don't run simulation now because this garment hasn't been worn by the avatar, so it will drape over the ground. So just a simple demonstration. And just in case you want to ask me what's the function of this internal shape, or what this function of what this shape can be developed into. And same as this previous one, even if you create a hole, you can also hit delete key to remove this hole and easily in the Close 3D software. Okay, so that's the internal shape, internal rectangle, ellipse, and then we move on to this dot, because every dot you created is within a pattern, and then you can draw it freely, or you can like holding your shift to really not shift, like you right click and then you can choose the dot sizes here by typing the specific number you want it to be. And then the position of that, you can move it up or down, move it upwards or downwards, or just directly tapping a number where you want to position this dot. And later you can use this segment sewing to sew this dot together. But this is not a really correct one because this doesn't have them quite close. You will have a lot of gathering. And to move that, to edit this dot, you can use this edit pattern tool and select any of these points and holding your shift, move it backwards. And I will talk about this transform tool and edit pattern tool later, but here I just want to demonstrate. And also you can use this transform pattern tool to move your dot away. But of course, you can't move your dot outside this area because it really not the dots option could do it. But if you want to create some dots here, and you can, as I mentioned, use this internal tool. And next thing we want to move on to this internal polygon, internal line tool. If you want to create some dots here, you can, for instance, start from the edge here, and then have this internal shape, and then click return, enter it. And then because you create this internal shape, internal line, you can right click, cut or cut sew, and choose this cut option, and then move this pattern away, and you can like sew these together. So that's how you can create some dot on the edge, but not using this dot function here, because for the dot function, you really create a hole within the pattern, not on the edge of the pattern. Okay, and that's the dot tool and internal tool, and this internal polygon line tool, quite similar to this polygon tool. But the only difference is, as I mentioned, you can create a dot with, you can create an internal line without closing it. So you don't have to close this pattern. And yeah, so any questions so far? Have you got any question you want to ask me? No, not really.
If you want to sew something on that's not a hole, like if you want to add something.
Yeah, that's also very possible. Like, because I created this internal shape, like, I mean, just use this one as a simple demonstration, okay? So because you create some shape, you doesn't need to convert it as a whole. You can directly clone as a pattern and move it outside. And then you just sew it, use this free sewing tool and hover it over this rectangle, and then you can sew it as well. So it doesn't necessarily to be a hole. You see what I mean? So yeah, I just demonstrate like it can be a hole. You can convert it into a hole, but it's not necessarily to be a hole. Is that the question you were asking?
Yeah, so you just need a line to sew on to. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. You just need the line to sew onto, and actually it doesn't have to be the same kind of line. For instance, if you use this transform pattern tool and click this pattern and enter this property editor, you might notice like this is 2D line length. So that's the overall length of this rectangle shape, a square shape. And you can actually use this internal line tool, and here to draw an internal line with the same kind of distance, like 193, like 193.3, and then click OK. And now you have this exact length of this rectangle shape, right? So you can continue to use this free sewing tool to actually sew these together, right? So you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. And yeah, so it's really a messy, it's a really messy pattern now. Yeah. Okay, so let me think about, maybe I will remove some of this line and keep part of this line. I don't know what that shape is, to be honest. But yeah, just for demonstration. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna move on to is this sewing function. I'm pretty sure you've already learned this sewing function, and I'll just like quickly go through it and add something just in case you haven't learned about, okay? Okay, so the first thing first, you can use this transform pattern tool, click this pattern, and then Ctrl C, Ctrl V to copy and paste a new one, new shape, new fabric. And after you create this fabric, and sometimes you might notice that your fabric, the front side the fabric and back side of fabric is this gray color. And that sometimes causes a problem when you do, let's say, this show arrangement point thing. So if, let's consider this is the back side of your design, and you just place it directly onto your design over here. And this pattern is fine because it's a really simple pattern. But some patterns, you might notice that this like grain inside fabric moves outside. So in order to avoid that, my simple suggestion is that you go to this fabric mode option, and currently you're choosing this textured surface. So normally I will switch onto the thick texture surface, and then you'll see like the front sides and back sides will be marked into the exact same color. So that will help you, for instance, you want to apply a kind of fabric onto your design, and then you don't want to show this darker gray color as the inner side of it because you want to maintain it as the same color no matter it's internal or external surface. Then you want to turn on this thick texture surface option rather than this texture surface option. So I place the dress at the back side, and then I want to place it at the front side as well. And another thing is that sometimes, so normally what I normally do is I select the pattern in 2D space, and then in 3D space, I move it outside my avatar so that I can see the arrangement point clearly. Because currently you see you can't really choose the arrangement point properly because it's basically covering it. So my suggestion is you move on to 2D pattern tool, and then use this gizmo. Have you learned about this gizmo yet? Okay, yeah, good. And you use this gizmo to move this pattern away, and then you choose this point here. And I think for this pattern is slightly too small, so I will kind of change the size of it. I will choose them all, enter this transform pattern tool, and then use like drag, make it a little bit white. Yeah, So remember, everything now you created in this, oops, everything you created in this 3D space, sorry, in this 2D space is actually the pattern. So that's the reason why sometimes students came to me like saying, oh, my garment is too tight. It's because you are like drawing on the shade directly. So that's not what I wanted for your design, because you really need to consider this is as a pattern. It's not a direct flat drawing. For instance, when I worked for, let's say, H&M, so, and we create something like this, by Illustrator. But this is really, you consider this shade and you show this flat drawing, but this is not the pattern you created, right? So make sure you give a little bit of thickness. Yeah, like this one is not the pattern. It's just a like flat drawing demonstration or three-dimensional drawing demonstration. So make sure in Clo 3D, you leave a little bit space for the thickness of the body. Otherwise, it's going to be really too tight for your design. Okay, so I kind of like drag, move it, and increase width of this design, and I don't really sure what this design looks like. It looks really weird so far. Okay, so yeah, so we're gonna talk about the sewing too. And if you have your garment like this and then run simulation, the garment will like fall onto the ground. But some students don't want to sew it right now. They want to see how the fabric located onto this garment and then sew. What you can do is, so let's turn off this arrangement point. What you can do is you hold your W key on your keyboard. You hold your W key and then you click anywhere on this 3D pattern. So let me show it clearly. You click anywhere on this 3D pattern, hold your W key.
Which key?
W.
Ah, W, okay.
Yeah. W, and then you click here. You see, this area be changed into orange, because that means you place a pin onto this area. You see, like, and then I can place it here. And then when you run this simulation, it will stay as it is, right? This is a really, really functional one, particularly if you're working on a lot with like draping or like even hand making, or even you want to tie a scarf. And so you want it to stay in the air. So you use this W key. And enter this simulation mode. Make sure you enter this simulation mode and you use this little hand. You can continue to drag, move this pin, right? So make sure you enter this simulation mode and use this little hand to drag, move this pin around. And stop simulation, and you can use your W key again. Click this red or orange button to remove it. So really hold your W key to add a pin or remove a pin. Okay, so that's a bit of an actual thing. We're going to talk about this later as well. So yeah, so let me remove, like go back to the previous stage, remove all of these pins. Now, what I want to do is to use this segment sewing and phrase sewing to sew them together after I place it close to my avatar. For the segment sewing, it's easy to understand. You can really like sew segments. And I suggest you to use that if it is if this kind of like shape has the exact same distance or exact same length. So I suggest you to use that when they're having the same length. And you might be given the introduction when you will sew something together, and make sure you choose the correct like notch, because you're creating some notch, right? Like this notch is this blue, like this dot here. And the first segment I choose my dot close to the shoulder point. And then you can also choose it close to the neck point as well, but I choose it close to the shoulder point. And then when you move on to this dress on the other side, you don't want your notch to be located here, because otherwise it will mess up this sewing relationship. And make sure this notch has been created close to this shoulder point. And you can also do this sewing in 3-dimensional design as well. For instance, you choose this segment here, and then choose the back segment here. And because this is a symmetric pattern, so whether you sew one thing and the other thing will be sewed simultaneously, the other side. And the problem with this current location of my design is that, you see, so the student Dazila, is that how I can never pronounce Swedish name properly. Yeah, so the thing you showed me before, like it looks a little bit weird, like when you sew this sleeve onto the arm, is perhaps because if you turn on the sewing relationship, you see this sewing relationship, it might be too close to the real avatar, the physical, the 3D avatar, like this. And then if you run simulation and then the software becomes a little bit confused, like there is this human body and you want me to sew it together with the garments. So it's gonna be like a little bit weird. And my suggestion is like you can select this both pattern and move it, drag it slightly downwards so that you make sure this sewing relationship is not too close. You have some collision here is fine, but make sure they're not like entirely sewed together, or even drag movably slightly backwards. And now we can run this simulation. And so that it will be no problem for this couple front sewing. So you won't have this collision anymore. But of course, because I have the front piece like this, I don't know why I created this. Oh yeah, for that dots demonstration, so I didn't sew them together. But yeah, so that's the segment sewing. And you can also use this free sewing option. Like this time, it doesn't really matter the length of your sewing. Like if I choose one length and then I choose the other length, it can be slightly different. So it's fine. We can still sew them together. Or even just you choose like sewing, this start sews here and then the other one start from here and even ends here. So it's fine by using this free sewing, and it can help you to create different gathering effect. So you see like here, you might notice there's some like gathering happening here. Okay, and then to remove the sewing relationship, you can use this free sewing tool and select any of the sewing relationship, either in 3D or 2D, and then hit delete. Or you can even move your sewing relationship. I see. So this one, I re-sew it like this. I move my sewing relationship. Starting point is here, ending point is here. And to see what's the sewing look like in 3-dimensional design by running this simulation. Okay, so any questions so far? No? Okay, so yeah, sewing. What else I want to mention here is, so you know how to use this sewing. Some he hit the car. No, the car hit him. Toy car hit him. Okay. And yeah, and what's next? So that's the sewing relationship, and then the segment sewing and free sewing. And yeah, so after you sew that, so have the sewing relationship, so you can, as I mentioned, you can either click by using this added sewing function, you can either drag, move this sewing relationship to the new position, or delete that. And also you can go to this property editor, and here has this folding angle and folding strength. But I will be mentioning more about this in our later sections when we're creating some pleating structure, because like folding strength is in terms of how you want these two fabric to be sewed, this strength of this folded space. And then folding angle is whether you want it to have a slightly curved shape or you want it to flat sewing. So 100 degree is flat sewing, and the number between 0 and 100 degree, you fold it in this way, and then the in like curved shape in this way, and then number between 100 degree to 360 degree is you fold in the opposite direction. And you can also choose the sewing line type. Currently is customized angle, and this is the angle you choose. Basically, it's a flat sewing, so you just sew them together. You don't have any folding angles for that. And you can also choose turned, and this will help you to create, for instance, flat but turned sewing. If you have interlining, for instance, like the lining two pieces of fabric, and they are sewing at the edge, and this will definitely not flat sewing, but this is gonna be the turned sewing relationship you're having. Make sure these two pieces of the fabric are flat, like they're kind of like placed one another, and then they are folded together. But I will mention this later when we talk about in tomorrow or next week section. But I just want to keep in mind, like when you turn on this sewing relationship, edit this sewing, and go to this property editor, there is this function called the sewing line tab. And so that's in terms of sewing. And okay, so let's talk about next the transform pattern tree. So as you see, I really following along my the study handout that circulated to you. So make sure you download it, and after that you can read it through, because I've teach many places based on these documents. So it's really helpful for students to remember things. And so so we're going to talk about transform pattern 2 and edit pattern 2. By edit pattern 2, there are quite a few options. So I will just firstly talk about transform pattern 2, and then we have another 10 minutes break, and then we continue our teaching section. Okay, so transform pattern 2. So they look a bit similar, like this transform pattern 2 and edit pattern 2. But for the transform, the difference between transform pattern 2 and the edit pattern 2 is that transform pattern 2, you really manipulate or rotate or scale it up or scale it down of the particular pattern, no matter it's internal pattern or external outside pattern. But then for the edit pattern 2, you really added specific point or edge or very like detailed the curve of your design. So that's the fundamental difference between transform pattern 2 and edit pattern 2. That's the reason why in the edit pattern 2, you have a lot more options compared with transform pattern tool. So firstly, let me use this transform pattern tool. Under this transform pattern tool, you can click outside pattern or external pattern. It's going to be the same. So, so let's demonstrate this internal pattern. And you can really scale it down or scale it up by using this edge corner point. And you can hover your mouse onto this top point to really rotate it. And while you rotate it, you can right click and type in specific rotation. And same as scale it up and scale it down. So while you're dragging, moving this this shape, you can right click and then change the transform percentage, like the scale you want to change it to be. Whether it's like half size, like 50%, and you can link this width and height. And you can also choose the dimension of this design and you click OK. So that's the transform pattern tool. You can really add it, rotate, move, scale it up, scale it down. And if you hover your mouse over this rotation, you see, like currently, the pivot point is in the middle. So you are rotating it based on the middle point. But what you also can do is you hover your mouse onto this middle point and double click it to activate this pivot point, and then move this pivot point to any of the other position, like here. And then now when you're rotating based on the new pivot point. Okay, so this helps you to really like control the rotation position. And under this transform pattern tool, for instance, if I rotate it, or if I have another pattern like this, and this rotates it like this. And another function is that by using this transform pattern tool, you click this pattern and then right click, and there are other functions called like where is it? Like rotate. And you want to rotate it clockwise, like you will rotate the entire pattern clockwise before setting 45 degree, 90 degree, or in parallel to x-axis or y-axis, or in parallel to particular pattern. This is a really good function because perhaps you have, for instance, like a trousers pattern, and then you cut them into pieces, and you really have a lot of patterns in different places and laying like this or that or here. And what you can do is click this pattern, right click, rotate, parallel to, and then you can select the line to match. For instance, you can select this line and then select the rotation line. And now you see, this really helps you to, for instance, you don't really know what the rotation of this pattern is, and you want it to locate it in parallel to your previous design. Then you can right click, go to rotate, parallel to. We can choose axis or y-axis, but this is a simple one. And now I want to demonstrate this parallel to function. And you choose one of these. Sorry. Any student want to ask a question? Do you want to ask me any question?